right. And so welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's great to have Department of Health and the city, sorry, I'm multitasking, letting people in, and the city wastewater treatment branch team here. And this event came out of a visit that Councilmember Kiaina organized for us to visit the plant after some exceedances. And we learned a lot there, that even though I had been there before and I've been interested in this topic, things that I didn't know. And so we thought it would be really great for everybody to hear straight from the experts and then have an opportunity to ask questions. We want to make sure people are making informed decisions about when to be in the water and when not to, because we don't want people to put themselves at undue risk, but we also don't want people to lose out on ocean recreation, which I know is really important to the community. So with that, I'm going to pass it over, see if our council member and senator have a word to say before we start.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Representative Martin, and thank you for the community for being here this evening. We actually have the director of the city's Department of Environmental Services that oversees the wastewater branch here with us tonight. So I'm pleased that he, as well as Department of Health leadership, is here. I know that many of you know that over the last 4 years, the city has appropriated nearly $100 million for the Kailua Wastewater Treatment Plant improvements, including $11 million for a UV light disinfection system to address the high bacterial levels in Kailua Bay, which is expected to be completed at the end of 2025. Over the last couple of months, there have been a lot of exceedance levels when it was not raining. And I heard from many of you. And I organized a visit recently to do two things. Number one, to see if we could expedite the completion of the UV light disinfection system. And number two, in light of that, what other short-term mitigation measures can be undertaken until the full system was in place. And when I found out that there's a difference in understanding about when it is safe to go in, we felt compelled to have the community come together to hear from the leadership directly. So thank you, Representative Martin.
No, I'll just add thanks to both Rep. Martin and Councilmember Kiaina for taking the lead in this issue for some time, helping to get the information out there. So really appreciate time and energy and effort from everyone.
All right, then let's go ahead and we'll start with the Department of Health. And for those that are attending tonight, first of all, I really appreciate your engagement, but let's hold your questions till after. I'm going to try to mute people as they come in, just so it's not disruptive. Let's hold the questions till after both presentations. First, we'll hear from the Department of Health, and then we'll hear from the city. And then if you have questions, it would be great to put them in the chat. That way we can aggregate questions that are similar, and they can make sure to cover the different nuances of similar questions all in one answer. And once we run through those, if there's enough time, we'll just go to voice questions. So with that, please take it away, Daryl.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. Can all of you see my screen? Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Daryl Lum. I'm the program manager at the Department of Health Clean Water Branch. We want to thank you for having us at your meeting today and providing us with this opportunity to explain our program's requirements impact on the Kailua Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant. I have our branch's email and phone number on this slide, and I also have our contact information at the end of this presentation. So please feel free to contact the Clean Water Branch directly if you have questions related to our program. And these presentation slides will be placed on our website tomorrow. So we put together these PowerPoint slides based on recent questions from the public, and I thought it would be helpful if I first give you a brief overview of the NPDES permit program and the beach monitoring program, Then I have slides with questions and the Clean Water Branch responses, where the questions are probably similar to the ones that many of you have. And hopefully after I go through these slides, many of your questions and concerns will be addressed. And in the event that you have additional questions, or if maybe I wasn't clear, please ask your questions during the question and answer period. I also have Bobby Texera, who is the Clean Water Branch's Enforcement Supervisor, Myron Honda, who's the Monitoring Supervisor, and Reef Magita, who's the Engineering Section Supervisor. They're all on this Zoom call. So all four of us will be here to help answer your questions related to our program. So the Clean Water Branch, we regulate discharges of pollutants to state surface waters. Okay, and the Clean Water Branch administers the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or the NPDES permit program in Hawaii. We received approval from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to run this program. And the Clean Water Branch also administers the Federal Beach Act monitoring program in Hawaii. And BEACH is an acronym for Beaches Environmental Assessment and Coastal Health Act. Okay, so now I'm going to give you a little bit of overview about the NPDES permit program. The NPDES permitting program is a federal permitting program to regulate point source water pollutant discharges to state surface waters. Okay, so point source, you can think of it as pollution coming from a specific identifiable source where you can trace the pollution being released to the state water. The NPDES permit is a tool to implement federal and state water pollution control requirements, and that includes the state's water quality standards to protect human health and the environment. The NPDES permits contain limits on what can be discharged, monitoring and reporting requirements, and other provisions to ensure that the discharge does not hurt water quality or people's health. The NPDES permits imposes water pollution control requirements on the permittees, and the permittees are the entities who we issue the NPDES permit to. The permittees are legally obligated to comply with all requirements specified in the issued NPDES permit. Violations of the permit requirements are punishable by requiring specific changes to facility or operations, fines, or other enforcement actions based on the nature of the violation. And in the case of the NPDES program, water pollution control occurs through the issuance of the permit. Okay, so the primary mechanism in NPDES permits for controlling pollutant discharges is the effluent limits. So these are limits on the different types of pollutants that is allowed to be released in the discharge. Okay, so before I continue, I just wanted to mention that I'm not going to get into the details of the NPDES permits, but instead I'm going to be introducing some concepts that will help you to provide you a little bit more understanding and context when we start answering the questions at the end of this presentation. Okay, so there's two types of effluent limitations. There's technology-based and there's water quality-based. Okay, so the technology-based, you think of it as limits that are created and have been placed in the federal NPDES regulations. So EPA looked at the different treatment technologies across the nation. They did their different economic analyses. And once they made a decision on the type of treatment that applies to a certain industry, they put it in the federal regs, and these are called T-bells, and they have to be in the NPDES permit if it applies to a certain facility. The other type of effluent limit is called a water quality-based effluent limit, or a WQ bell. Okay, and these WQ bells are limits that are derived from the state's water quality standards. Okay, so the federal NPDES regulations requires WQ bells in NPDES permits for all pollutant parameters that have a reasonable potential to cause or contribute to an excursion of the state's water quality standards. So in the previous slide, when I mentioned that the NPDES permits are to implement the state's water quality standards, so it's done through the WQ bells. And in case anyone's interested, Hawaii's water quality standards is in the Hawaii Administrative Rules, Title 11, Chapter 54. Okay, so one of the WQ bells that I wanted to discuss is for a parameter called enterococci. Okay, and the reason I want to go over this is because this WQ bell is related to some of the questions that we're going to answer towards the end of this presentation. Okay, so a little bit about enterococci. It's an EPA recommended fecal indicator bacteria that's found in high concentrations in the intestinal tract of humans and warm-blooded animals. Enterococci mimics the fate and transport of most common gastrointestinal pathogens as it goes through the wastewater treatment plant. So the idea is after the treatment process, if the indicator is not found, then it's safe to assume that the pathogens will also not be found. So Hawaii's water quality standards contains criteria for enterococci. And this is in the recreational water quality criteria, which was designed to protect the public from harmful levels of pathogens while they participate in water contact activities. Okay, so we have a summarized version of that, the enterococci criteria on the screen here. So I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to explain what this means. Okay, so Hawaii's enterococci water quality standards criteria says that all water bodies shall not exceed 35 CFU per 100 milliliters geometric mean over any 30-day interval, and not to exceed 130 CFU per 100 milliliters statistical threshold value in more than 10% of the samples taken within the same 30-day interval in which the geometric mean was calculated. Okay, so I know that was a lot of words. Okay, first of all, the CFU, okay, that stands for colony forming units. So you think of it as the bacteria count. Okay, so when a sample is taken to analyze for enterococci, the sample is taken to the lab. The lab has to analyze it according to the approved methods. And part of that is to count the number of bacteria that's cultured using the sample. Okay, so if you see 130 CFU, that means the analyst counted 130 bacteria cells. The geometric mean is just another way of calculating an average that looks at the central tendency of a data set. And statistical threshold value is a value that was derived using statistics. Okay, so these water quality standards that we have in Hawaii standards actually comes from an EPA recommendation. And EPA created this recommendation by looking at a data set that is from epidemiological study. Okay, so in this data set, they looked at the number of swimmers who reported illnesses in beaches around the mainland where sewage was being released in the beach area. So just to let everyone know, Hawaii doesn't have this type of situation, and Hawaii wasn't included in this study. Okay, but EPA took this data set and they calculated the geometric mean, which happened to be 35 CFU per 100 milliliters. And then they calculated the 90th percentile of that data set, which happened to be 130 CFU per 100 milliliters. And the 90th percentile is a value where 90% of the data is below that value. Okay, and at these levels, this corresponded to 36 illnesses in 1,000 swimmers. So EPA made a decision that this is considered acceptable. Okay, so if a water body meets the 35 geo mean and the 130 statistical threshold value, then that's acceptable risk. And if the water body exceeds this, then it's unacceptable risk. Okay, so when it comes to the Kailua treatment plant and all of our wastewater treatment plants, the discharge that comes from these facilities is treated sewage, and it may contain pathogens at elevated concentrations if it's not properly disinfected. Okay, so the Department of Health, based upon the nature of this type of activity, we determined that reasonable potential exists that this type of discharge would exceed the water quality standards criteria for enterococci. So because of this, NPDES permits for these types of wastewater treatment plant facilities need to have WQ bells for enterococci to ensure human health protection. Okay, so in the Kailua Wastewater Treatment Plant's NPDES permit, the WQ bell for enterococci is a monthly geometric mean of 25,655 CFU per 100 milliliters, and that's in the yellow highlighted text. And there's a single sample maximum equal to 57,850 CFU per 100 milliliters, and that's in the blue text. Okay, so the way in which we calculated the monthly geometric mean is we took the water quality standards geometric mean, the criteria, and we multiplied it by dilution value. And the way in which we calculated the single sample maximum is we took the water quality standard criteria statistical threshold value and we multiplied it by a dilution value. Okay, so this dilution, it refers to the mixing process when the wastewater effluent combines with the ocean water through the outfall diffuser, okay, as the treated wastewater is being released to the ocean. In the NPDES permit, there is a tool called a zone of mixing. And the zone of mixing is a defined area around the discharge where some or all of the water quality standard criteria may not be met. And the zone of mixing NPDES tool is to allow for the assimilation of the discharge. So when a discharger requests this type of zone of mixing, they are required to do computer modeling, calculations, and assessment. And this is how the dilution is determined through these these computer models. And when the Department of Health establishes these zone of mixings in an NPDES permit, we have to do so based on regulations and implementation policies. Okay, so the reason why we multiplied, I'm sorry. So the reason why that we multiply the water quality standards criteria by the dilution value is so that we can back calculate the WQ bell so that compliance can be assessed at the facility and after treatment. So this shows what is coming from the facility and how well the facility is treating the wastewater. This also eliminates the issues of having to sample in the ocean to determine compliance with the WQ bell, because you could have issues with safety issues in collecting the samples. And you also may run into situations where people are wondering if the sample contains, the ocean water sample contains pollution from everyone else. Okay, so this is the reason why we back calculate the WQ bell so that compliance can be assessed at the facility. Okay, so in case anyone's interested, the Kailua treatment plant NPDES permit and the fact sheet, which explains the legal justification and the calculations behind the NPDES permit, are available on our website, and I have the link here. And this web address also contains all of the NPDES individual permits that have been issued since 2018. Okay, so what I'm going to do on this slide is I'm going to explain some of the concepts that I brought up in the previous slides using this illustration. Okay, and we thought that this might help explain some of this a little bit better, because we understand that if you don't do this for a living, then some of this is going to sound new, right? Okay, so in the upper left-hand corner, okay, that's supposed to represent a house. And in the upper right-hand corner, that's supposed to represent a factory or a business. Okay, so from the homes and businesses, raw wastewater is collected at a treatment plant. Okay, so whenever we flush the toilet, use the sink, wash your hands, this raw wastewater goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and you can think of this as the Kailua Regional Treatment Plant. The treatment plant uses the different treatment processes and breaks down the harmful pollutants that comes from our bodies and from whatever else is in that raw wastewater. Okay, and with that treated wastewater, they have to dispose of it somehow because it just, it doesn't disappear. Okay, so they release it through a deep ocean outfall that discharges the treated effluent into the ocean, okay, where the treated effluent then mixes with the ocean water. Okay, so the NPDES permit regulates the treated wastewater quality, and compliance is required after treatment and before commingling with other discharges. Okay, and that's the actual federal requirement. And the WQ bell is back calculated using dilution that came from the zone of mixing dilution models so that compliance can be assessed at the facility. Okay, so in this illustration, we have the NPDES compliance at the facility and before it mixes with anything in the ocean. Okay. The water quality standard criteria has to be met at the zone of mixing, okay, in this area here. Okay, so because the WQ bell was calculated using the dilution and the water quality standard criteria, if there's an exceedance of the WQ bell, that means the water quality standards criteria has been violated at the boundary of the zone of mixing. Okay, and that's a violation of the Clean Water Act and Hawaii's water pollution control statutes. And just for everyone's information, the zone of mixing is shown as a rectangle, and that's called a regulatory zone of mixing. In real life, it doesn't really look like that. The rectangle is for simplification purposes, for writing the permit and for establishing sampling stations. Okay. Another program that the Clean Water Branch administers is the Beach Monitoring Program. In the year 2000, there was an amendment to the Clean Water Act, and that was the Beach Act. And Beach stands for Beaches Environmental Assessment and Coastal Health Act. Okay, and the Beach Act established national standard criteria for coastal recreational water monitoring and public notification of possible pollution within the coastal recreational waters, or the beaches. The Beach Act also authorized the EPA to provide funding to eligible states to implement a water monitoring and public notification program. Okay, so Hawaii took advantage of this program, and this is why the Department of Health receives EPA grant funding for the Hawaii Beach Monitoring Program. The goal of Hawaii's beach monitoring program is to reduce risk of illness to users of Hawaii's beaches due to sewage pollution by issuing advisories when warranted for public health protection. And as a condition of the EPA grant, the Department of Health must monitor our beaches within the state for the fecal indicator bacteria enterococci and provide public notification when the enterococci levels exceed a threshold value or when that same threshold value is likely to be exceeded. And the threshold value that we chose for the beach monitoring program was 130 CFU per 100 milliliters. So this is based on an EPA recommendation, and it also happens to match the statistical threshold value that's in Hawaii standards. So the Clean Water Branch, we notify the public whenever this threshold is exceeded by using our water quality notification and advisories website. This website has an automated subscription service. So after this, this meeting, in case you haven't done so already, please, you can visit the website, you can subscribe, and it'll send you automated email notifications whenever the water quality notification or advisories are issued or terminated. Okay, so I have the web address on the screen here. So this slide shows the different advisories and notifications that is on that website. Okay, so there's a beach notification, and this is when our routine beach samples exceed the threshold value, the 130 CFU per 100 milliliters. Okay, and as part of this notification, we inform the public that it's been exceeded, and we also mentioned that there's going to be a confirmation sample taken the next day. We also have a beach advisory. So when that confirmation sample is taken, and if it exceeds the threshold, then we notify the public using this advisory. So it's through the beach notification and the beach advisory that we satisfy the first part of the EPA grant requirement, which is notify the public when the threshold is exceeded. We also have a brownwater advisory. Okay, so the brownwater advisory is issued when there's conditions that turn the coastal areas brown. So this could be after heavy rain, strong surf, high wind, okay, and the Department of Health has many years of data that shows during this type of brown water conditions, more often than not, the threshold is exceeded. Okay, so we issue these brownwater advisories to address the second part of the EPA grant commitment, which is notify the public when the threshold is likely to be exceeded. We also have the spill advisories. Okay, so this is a notification when there's a sewage spill that enters state waters. And we have permit exceedance advisories. So this is notifications of a discharge from a wastewater treatment plant that exceeds the NPDES permit effluent limit. Okay, so a little bit more information about enterococci. Okay, so again, enterococci is the EPA recommended fecal indicator bacteria. It's found in the intestinal tracts of humans and other warm-blooded animals. The EPA uses this indicator since the environment contains billions of bacteria, and it's very difficult, or if not impossible, to identify the source and the levels when it's in the environment. The enterococci testing is relatively easy and cost-effective. The notification threshold, again, for the beach monitoring program is 130 CFU per 100 milliliters. And because it matches with the statistical threshold value from our standards, which was derived from the epidemiological data, it's associated with an illness of 36 illnesses per 1,000 swimmers. Enterococcus levels greater than 130 CFU per 100 milliliters indicates that there's increased probability of risk of illness due to pathogens that cause gastrointestinal illness. It doesn't mean that you're going to become ill, but it means that there's increased probability. There is never zero risk of contracting gastrointestinal illness by recreating at a beach. There's only low risk and high risk. Low risk is when it's 130 and below. High risk is when it's above 130. Enterococcus levels only give a rough glimpse of the potential for contracting gastrointestinal illness. It does not give insight into the potential risks of other types of illnesses that you can contract from other hazards, contaminants, or pathogens that's present in the environment. Okay, so now I'm going to go over the questions that we received. And a lot of the ideas and the concepts that I brought up in the previous slides, it's going to help explain, some of our responses to these questions. Okay, so first question, where does the Kailua Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant discharge? Okay, so if you look at the figure, there's this yellow shaded figure. So this represents the Kailua Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant. And by the way, this figure comes from the city's NPDES application, and it's also at the end of the NPDES permit. Okay, so the city provides wastewater treatment for 94,000 people. It has the treatment plant has a design flow of 15 million gallons per day. Okay, and the treated wastewater is discharged through a deep ocean outfall with a diffuser that's approximately 3,500 feet from shore at a depth of approximately 105 feet below the surface. Okay, so if you kind of think about what's going on, the city is providing everyone a huge service. Okay, they're collecting our wastewater, they're treating it, and then they're disposing of it for us. Okay, and that's a very big public health service that they're providing all of us. Okay, so this outfall from the Kailua treatment plant, this is shared with the Kaneohe Marine Corps Base's wastewater reclamation facility. The NPDES permit for the Kailua treatment plant allows for a zone of mixing, okay, and that's represented by the green rectangle here. Okay, and this allows for dilution of the treated wastewater from the outfall. The NPDES permit requires monitoring for various parameters at the boundary of the zone of mixing. Okay, and the NPDES permit requires shoreline monitoring for enterococci 5 times a month at the locations shown on in the figure. Okay, so over here, 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 here. So all these locations are required in the NPDES permit, and the city tests for enterococci at these areas. Okay, so next question. What does an enterococci NPDES permit limit exceedance at the Kailua Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant mean? Okay, so if there is an exceedance of a WQ bell, this means that the water quality standards criteria has been violated. And this is true for any of our NPDES permitted facilities. The purpose of the water quality standards criteria is to achieve the designated use of the water body. The designated use is the state's goal for the water body. So when you exceed the water quality standard criteria, it means that the designated use has been impaired. If an effluent limit from the NPDES permit is a WQ bell, an exceedance is a violation of the water quality standards, Clean Water Act, and Hawaii's water pollution control statutes. And since the WQ bells are back calculated so that compliance can be assessed at the facility, okay, this is also we know that because the WQ bell is using the water quality standards and the dilution that's within the zone of mixing, if you exceed that WQ bell, that means the water quality standards are not being met at the boundary of the zone of mixing, and the wastewater was not adequately treated. Okay, next question. What is a permitted facility required to do when there is an exceedance of an NPDES permit limit? So the permittees are required to notify the Clean Water Branch of any permit exceedances, and this is usually when they become aware, but no later than 24 hours after the event. The permittees are required to submit to the Clean Water Branch a follow-up report describing the cause of the exceedance and the steps planned or taken to reduce, eliminate, or prevent the reoccurrence. For wastewater treatment facilities, there may also be additional monitoring, notifications to new services, and signposting requirements within the affected areas. And violations of the permit limits are enforceable violations which may subject the permittee to enforcement action, including required corrective actions and administrative fines. Next question. How does the Clean Water Branch notify the public of exceedances of the enterococci NPDES permit limits? Okay, so the Clean Water Branch uses our advisory and notifications website. Okay, and for Kailua Beach, the Clean Water Branch has issued an advisory covering the majority of Kailua Bay when there are permit exceedances from the Kailua Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant. So while the outfall from the Kailua Treatment Plant is relatively far from Kailua Beach, the area that's included in the permit exceedance advisory is large out of an abundance of caution because the Clean Water Branch does not know exactly which way the discharge plume may drift. And that leads to the next question. What is the thought process behind this? Okay, so because you have a WQ bell that, or when it's exceeded, this means that the water quality standard is not being met at the edge of the zone of mixing. And we don't know the extent or how far beyond the zone of mixing at the time of the violation. Okay, since it's unknown when the effluent limit will be exceeded, it's impossible to predict the time of day, current, wind speed, and the recreational users in the area at the time that this occurs. Okay, there could also be weather issues where the city cannot send their staff to sample at the zone of mixing due to safety reasons. And the Department of Health needs to notify the public out of an abundance of caution to protect public health. The notification allows the public to make their own informed decision to determine whether to recreate in the water or not. And our notification is not a prohibition, and the Clean Water Branch cannot close any beaches. Okay, and whenever there is a WQL exceedance at the Marine Corps Base Kaneohe's wastewater reclamation facility, the permit exceedance advisory map is handled in the exact same way. Okay, next question. Why do the Clean Water Branch enterococci shoreline sampling values not always correspond with the NPDES permit exceedances from the Kailua Regional Wastewater Treatment Plant? Okay, so there's several reasons for this. Okay, first one is there's dilution and mixing. So the Kailua Treatment Plant's outfall is located approximately 3,500 feet from shore at a depth of about 100 feet deep. And the outfall was designed with a diffuser to induce rapid dilution. Okay, so if you can take a look at the figure that's on the left. So this is not from the treatment plant. We found this on the internet. Okay, but what this figure shows is an outfall. And towards the end of the outfall are these openings. They're called diffusers or ports. Okay, and the treated wastewater is released through these tiny openings and it induces rapid dilution. There's dispersion, there's mixing. Okay. Other factors would include things like wind direction, current, tides, and this affects the direction of the plume from the facility's discharge. Okay, and this can cause the plume to either move towards or away from the shoreline, which would affect the impact that you would observe at the shoreline. Okay, and then the last one is UV radiation. So when you have long periods of exposure to the sunlight, so when the plume is exposed to the sunlight, this tends to reduce the level of enterococci in the water. Okay, so if there is an exceedance of the WQ bell at the facility, but the shoreline stations do not show any impact, then that's actually a good thing. Okay, and we know that these are the different factors that could be causing that. Okay, next question. Where can I find Clean Water Branch's monitoring data? Okay, so in the past, our Beach Act monitoring program data was available on our website for the public to view and download. Okay, however, we are in a transitional period where our current system has to be upgraded. Okay, our system was created a long time ago and it used technology that is considered very old, and we were told that it represents a security risk from the state IT. So our current system had to be taken offline. Our new system is not available yet, so we do not have anything on the internet where people can download the data. Okay, but the data is public information. So if you would like to request sampling results from the Clean Water Branch, please email our branch email, cleanwaterbranch@doh.hawaii.gov with your request, and we will send you the data.
Daryl, I'm going to
Yes.
cut you off there.
Okay,
Sorry.
sure.
If that's all right, if you can save the rest of your slides
Okay, sure.
for the Q&A so that we make sure we have time to get to the to Babcock's presentation as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so if that's okay.
Yeah.
And we'll
I'll
come back.
stop sharing.
Okay, great. I'm going to. Are you able to unmute, Roger?
Yes, I'm unmuted.
Okay, fantastic. So feel free to share your screen as well. And again, we can ask questions of everybody, of Department of Health and of Environmental Services after the presentation.
Yeah. So thanks, Rep. Martin, and thanks, Councilmember Kia Aina, for being here, and everybody else, senators and representatives and the public. I just want to mention who's here. I'm Roger Babcock, Director of the Department of Environmental Services. We take care of wastewater and solid waste for the city. My Deputy Director, Mike O'Keefe, is on here. Daniel Brick, who is the Chief of our Environmental Quality Division, which handles all of our permits, all of the sampling, all of the reporting, and basically our interactions with the State Department of Health. And his Assistant Chief, Josh Nagashima, is also online. So there'll be plenty of people to answer questions after we get through this. So let me share my screen. And see if I can get this to work. Make it do a slideshow. Let's see. Things in the way. Okay, hopefully you can see a nice picture of the of a wastewater treatment plant. Can you see that, Rep. Martin? You're muted. Can we see that? Are people seeing that?
We can see it fine. You might want to go to slideshow so that we see it even bigger.
I'm on slideshow and I'm seeing it as slideshow. You're not seeing it as slideshow?
We're seeing your small slides on the side. It's not a big deal. Yeah, but if you click that button slideshow, we may see just the slide that you want us to see it. Nope.
Yeah, it's already showing that.
Yeah. Okay, never mind. Just go back to where you were to
Yeah.
resume slideshow. It was fine.
Okay. Okay, so I'll go ahead. It's for some reason it's not working perfectly, but I want to thank Daryl and DOH for being here and making that presentation. You know, we, as was mentioned, the city, we have to collect wastewater from everybody and we have to treat it. And our job is to do that very efficiently and effectively in order to meet the requirements of our permits. And the goal of that, of course, is to protect public health and the environment. And we take that very seriously. These treatment plants, this one in particular, is operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, because wastewater is made all the time, every day by all of us. And we do work very closely with the Department of Health. So they're our partners in this effort in order to protect the public and the environment. And I want to note that these treatment plants, that's part of the facility shown in the picture there, you know, we're always treating the wastewater, all of the wastewater. So this treatment plant has never had a spill into the outfall of untreated wastewater going out into the ocean. That just doesn't happen. So Daryl mentioned about spills. Spills are generally from the collection system, meaning if it's raining hard, it comes out of a manhole. Those are, of course, also reportable, and we have to clean those up. Well, we don't have spills from the wastewater treatment plant. So I just want people to know that water is always treated, and it's always treated through every process that we have. We never bypass a process under any conditions. All processes are always working. Sometimes processes, for various reasons that I'll go over, are not working at their full efficiency. And that's when we can have exceedances. But be assured, we're always treating all the water, and it's always, that's always the case. So an exceedance is not a spill, and it's not untreated. It's always treated through all the processes that I'll show you. So I'm going to go to the next slide. This is a schematic view of what the treatment plant looks like. It has that shape that Daryl showed on his slide from our NPDES permit, and that's why it's that shape. It was a yellow blob on the map. This shows basically the treatment processes in a much more simple schematic format. Raw wastewater comes in up here on the upper left, and it goes through preliminary treatment. Preliminary treatment is screening and grit removal to remove things like sand and coffee grinds, stuff like that, as well as large objects that can be removed in a screen, similar to a screen on your window. Then it goes to a primary clarifier, which is a settling process to remove things that will settle within a couple of hours. Then it moves on to secondary treatment, which is biological treatment. We have biotowers, and then we have solids contactors, and then we have secondary clarifiers. So those are all part of the secondary treatment process. At that point, we have treated effluent, and we call that effluent, and that goes out the outfall. What this treatment plant doesn't have yet, but is under construction, is a disinfection process, which will be located after the secondary clarifier as an additional process to directly kill bacteria and other pathogens, viruses, in the effluent before it goes out the outfall. As I mentioned, this plant is staffed 24 hours a day. There are 24 operators that have worked very different shifts, all different schedules during the week. We also have 17 maintenance personnel at this facility, and these staffing levels are sufficient for the operation of this treatment plant. A little bit more about treatment and sampling of the effluent. Wastewater that has been treated is sampled and tested for a whole bunch of constituents. Tonight, we're talking about enterococcus, but there are many other parameters that have to be monitored as part of our permit. And it is regulated, of course, as by DOH, as we just heard. So enterococcus is the bacteria indicator organism, as Daryl mentioned. Daryl explained very, very well. It is found in wastewater, but it's also found in soil, and it's everywhere in the environment. And so the presence of enterococcus, as Daryl mentioned, does not absolutely correlate with pathogens, for example, and it's not a pathogen itself. We sample 4 times a week at the effluent monitoring station at the treatment plant. When we find a level above the permit limit, that's called an exceedance, and we notify Department of Health immediately. Sampling then is increased to daily, and it continues daily until we decide that we don't need to do that anymore because we haven't had exceedances. As Daryl mentioned, it's a point that you might not have caught, but measurement of bacteria is done in a laboratory, and it takes 24 hours to get a result, because what you're doing is you're taking a water sample and you're growing bacteria. They have to grow in order for them to be able to see them and be counted. So you get results 24 hours later for any type of biological sampling. So as was mentioned, the treated effluent is discharged through the ocean outfall. The outfall is inspected every 5 years. The difference in distance there has to do with the length of the diffuser. So the diffuser is very, very long. It's not just one point, as illustrated here in this little figure, which is not Kailua. It's just a general figure from the internet. But it's very long, and I believe there's 50 different openings in that diffuser. So treated effluent is rapidly diluted, and the The idea is that in that small zone of mixing, everywhere, the only time it would be higher than 35 would be in that zone of mixing. Everywhere outside of there, it meets the 35. Okay. You've seen this figure before, and Daryl mentioned that we have seven shoreline monitoring stations that we normally would monitor 5 times per month. We have the zone of mixing stations that we monitor as needed monthly, if it's possible to do that, if we can get a boat out there. Again, if we exceed in the treated effluent, we begin monitoring daily until further notice. Same thing with the zone of mixing if we're able to get out there. The shoreline samples, it's important to note, as Daryl did too, that they are influenced by runoff that enters the bay. And they're entering at both ends of the bay when it rains. Kailua Canal is not always open, but it does get open when there's heavy rain. Kailua Canal is always open, but it's not doing heavy discharge except for when there's a lot of rain. But there's something going in and out of there all the time at that end. So I want to go through a little bit about the timeline of the recent the exceedances in 2022 and 2023. So in December of 2022, Department issued what's called an administrative order on consent, an AOC. I'm going to call that AOC number 1. And it was issued, that was actually issued by EPA due to enterococcus exceedances that occurred in 2021. So the requirements of that were us to increase our monitoring frequency from 5 times per month to 4 times per week. And that remains in effect, essentially, from then till now and going forward until we'll see the next AOC is if that's when that is completed. So we needed to complete an engineering condition assessment of the treatment plant by April of 2023. We needed to submit a treatment plant enterococcus assessment to analyze the conditions under when exceedances may occur by March of 2023. We needed to submit then also a supplement to the operations manual the operators use that optimized the processes to meet enterococcus permit limits by April of last year. So we did do all those things. We submitted them all to EPA. And so what did they find? They found that the only thing that's really going to work is for us to install UV disinfection. It did say that some process optimizations may or may not help, and they have some detailed, very technical process parameters. Controlling the flow and adding chemicals may help, but they were not able to find a correlation with those things positively making a difference on a reliable basis. So that led to deciding to install disinfection. A little bit more on the timeline. Moving now to May of 2023, we, ENV, on our own, decided to create and implement a Kailua Tunnel, KK Tunnel operational protocol for high flow events. And we did that in partly from the analysis, but also to see if that would help optimize the operations. In July of 2023, DOH issued a notice of violation for the exceedances that occurred back in 2023. Earlier in 2023. So that includes a fine. And then in August or September, EPA closed that AOC because we had successfully done all the things that were in there and issued a new one. And the new one has requirements to do certain things. Continue to use the KK Tunnel protocol that we had developed. Use the supplemental O&M manual that we had developed. Continue monitoring minimum of 4 times per week and indefinitely until this next AOC is terminated. Install continuous turbidity meter for the effluent. Install ultraviolet disinfection by December 31st of 2025, which is what we're doing. Keep both biotowers in continuous operation until after the UV is operational, and then refurbish the 2 biotowers by January 31st of 2029. But do not start that until the disinfection is in place. Finishing up the timeline then, earlier this year, in June, additional equipment was brought online to assist in optimizing the plant performance during normal flow conditions. And we also began bench testing of an interim chemical disinfection. So this is for before the UV system is online, which is still about 16 months away. So we're in the process of doing that bench scale chemical disinfection and to figure out its feasibility and what the effective dose would be. If that's successful, then we will have to essentially rapidly try to build a system to make that happen, to be able to add the chemicals. But in the long term, we're not going to do chemical addition. We're going to be doing UV disinfection. Okay, so why do we have dry weather enterococcus exceedances? That was one of the questions. And what has happened is occasionally we have equipment problems or failures. And so that can cause exceedances for a day. Generally, we get those things fixed very quickly. The other thing is recovering from high flows. So we can have, it can stop raining, but runoff and infiltration and water coming into our system doesn't stop for several days because essentially the ground has to drain out. Under wet weather, flows increase a lot due to what's known as inflow and infiltration into our system. And that can affect the plant performance when flows are much higher than what the normal average flows are. So when you're running at a very high capacity, the plant performance can be less than optimal. So our tunnel is used during high flow conditions. Actually, it's used all the time, but during high flow conditions, it can store some water to reduce the amount of water coming into the treatment plant. And the tunnel stores water, and then we pump the water out of the tunnel and put it through the process. And it can allow us to sort of moderate the high flows. The tunnel can store 9 million gallons, and it has a maximum pumping rate of 60 million gallons a day, which is the maximum, which is the amount of water we can put through the treatment plant. And let's see, the flows can remain high for several days after a rain event. And then it's called dry weather rather than wet weather exceedance. So a little bit more about inflow and infiltration. During heavy rain, flows to the plant increase very quickly after it starts raining. Basically what's happening is rainwater is percolating into the soil above and around the sewer pipes, and the sewer pipes can essentially act kind of like a French drain. They can include, this causes by cracks in the sewer pipes and manholes, missing or damaged cleanout caps at people's homes, and stormwater connections to the sanitary system. But we really don't have any evidence of city storm drains connected to the sewer system. But after a significant storm event ends, it can take several days for flows at the plant to return to normal daily flows. We do monitor, this is one of the questions, we do monitor, of course, our wastewater pump stations. We have approximately 15 pump stations that contribute to this treatment plant because it's a big area. And we can monitor those for signs of inflow and infiltration issues, but that's quite difficult. We do have flow meters on the pump stations, but it's fairly difficult to do. We do investigations within the basin, which does include something called smoke testing, which you may have heard of, to try and find out where there are large cracks where water can be getting into the system. And one of the biggest challenges we have is inflow and infiltration originating from private property laterals. It's easier for us to find and fix pipes in the city streets that we own. But things that are on private property, we don't own that, and we can't even access those generally. Okay. A little bit more about INI. So since July of 2020, when the KK, within the KK Basin, we've smoke tested about 40 miles of sewer mains and about 16 miles of sewer laterals, which included about 4,100 parcels. or properties. We did discover during that time 286 violations. When we find a violation, then we issue letters of warning to the residents, and then we escalate enforcement as necessary, and to try and ensure that repairs are made. I can't tell you for sure that all 286 of those violations were repaired. I&I tracking is challenging. You can't do it while it's raining because the flows are high everywhere, and it's really hard to differentiate what's I&I from the rest of the flow. But smoke testing is a good way. We do maintain and upgrade and repair sewers a lot, and we spend a lot of money on it. So we repair, which we're using what's called lining, to reline the pipes to make them more watertight, over 15,000 feet of sewers annually in the KK Basin. And we do that every year, and that's ongoing. It doesn't stop. It's a continuous thing. That's only about 3 miles, and there's a lot more miles of sewer pipes than that. So, but that's basically the pace at which we're able to do it, because we have a lot of other basins as well. So illegal dumping into the storm drain system was a question. The storm drain system is separate from the sewer system. If you see that and you want to do something about it, you would report it to our Department of Facility Maintenance. One thing to note, based on this, is that you should never open a sanitary sewer manhole cover to drain a flooded street, because that water is all going to come straight to the treatment plant, and it's going to cause us problems. A question was asked about the Kailua neighborhood sewer project to replace cesspools. We do have a project there, which will add sewers so that cesspools can be closed. It's currently in the planning phase. The next phase is design, followed by then construction. When that will happen is dependent upon the progress of those different steps. Those are done by consultants. Construction is estimated to be completed in approximately 2031, but that could change. So that was a specific question asked us. Now I want to briefly go over one of the things that we're planning to do to try to provide better and more up-to-date information to the public. So we're creating a website, it's a web page on our website, to share our monitoring results for the Kailua zone of mixing and our 7 shoreline monitoring stations. So we'll display the recent enterocockus results for the 7 shoreline monitoring stations with an archive of past results. So zone of mixing will be displayed whenever they're available. We have already increased our shoreline sampling frequency from at least 5 times per month to 3 times per week. And we will continue to do that, and we will post the data as soon as the website is online, which is probably about another week out. This is a draft of what you will see on the new web page. As Daryl showed, it's very similar. You got the treatment plant there in yellow. You got the zone of mixing, the outfall pipe, the zone of mixing, and you have the 7 monitoring stations shown here as green, and one shown as red, and one shown as gray, to kind of give you a flavor for what the different colors will look like and what they will mean. So the green dots will mean that in the most recent sample, it was normal bacterial levels, somewhere between 0 and 130 per 100 mils. If it shows red, it means it's elevated, and it's levels of 131 or higher for the sample collected. Gray dots would mean that there was no results for the previous day. As mentioned, the threshold value is 130, so that's why the difference between what will define red and what will define green. So what will, this next slide, it shows, to give you an idea of what this data looks like, collected from the actual monitoring stations over the past 3 years, whenever there were effluent exceedances. So remember, the criteria for advisory is 130. So you see here, you got the Kailua Beach station, you got the Kalama Beach, you got that monitoring station number 1, station number 2, station number 4, and you got the North Beach, and you got the Oneaba Beach. The blue bars are when there was also a brownwater advisory. So all of these occasions here, all of these exceedances, Department of Health put up an advisory with the map that Daryl showed, showing the big yellow thing over all of Kailua Bay. What this shows is it shows that on those days, these are what the bacterial levels were at the near shore next to the beach. And so what you see is you see very few numbers close to or above 130, meaning that we're doing this because we feel that it gives additional information to inform the public to be able to make a decision about the water, whether they're going to go in there. And so what you see is when there's a brownwater advisory, that's a different situation. It's influenced by storms and stuff like that. And so, the water has more enterococcus in it. That doesn't mean there's sewage. And this also indicates that there's very little contamination to be concerned with. So that's what this table is showing. This kind of information will then be available. It won't be just exceedance days. These are only days where there was an exceedance. It'll be every 3 days a week forever. It's going to show you what the numbers are at these locations, and you better look at what it was 2 days ago, what it is today, what it was 3 days, 4 days ago, etc., and going back. So that's what we're planning, and which is in development right now. It just needs to be finished. There's some other information there. I think I've covered most of that before. This is a continuation, of that table, and you see, most of the time, even during the exceedances, this is not all the other days when there's no exceedance. These are just days when there was an exceedance. You see, very small numbers, and so you can use your own judgment to decide whether you think it's safe to go in that water or not. We're also going to be changing our signs that we post. The sign on the right is the advisory sign that we currently use. And it shows that page from the NPDES permit. It has a red thing around the zone of mixing, and it has coordinates, latitude, longitude coordinates of the sample sites, but it doesn't give you any data. The new one is going to look a little different. It's going to it's similar in a way, but it's a little bit more user-friendly map, and it will then tell you to go to the QR code to see the data, and it will then show you the shoreline monitoring data, as was just, it'll take you to that website that I was just showing you the mock-up of. So we want to make it a little bit easier to understand the map and where the beach is and stuff like that. We're also increasing the size, and the QR code will direct you to our new water quality site. The quick update then, last thing is on our UV project. We did design, we did planning, we did design. We proceeded to award a contract to a contractor, gave him what's called a notice to proceed, which means you can start work. That was issued on March 26th. Completion date is December 31st of 2025, next year. That's the cost of the contract. Contractor has started work. Once UV disinfection is in place, plant will reliably remove 99.9% or more of enterococcus prior to discharge and easily meet the permit requirements. So that is, I believe, my last slide. Thank you very much for your attention, and turn it back to you, Rep. Martin, and we can go to questions.
Okay, so thank you very much. I really appreciate you did address the Committee on Water Quality from the Neighborhood Board sent a whole bunch of questions ahead of time, and you really did address so many of those. There's so many questions that came in. So I wanted to kind of quickly go through some of them, and then we can open it up for people to ask their questions out loud. There were some questions. Can I just, since you didn't mention this, can I just verify? Is there a bypass valve on the conveyance tunnel from Kaneohe, or is there nothing? Is there no valve there? Oh, sorry. I'm gonna stop being a control freak so you can unmute yourself.
Okay, there. Now I can unmute. No, there is no such thing as a bypass valve. It's
Okay.
not possible to bypass treatment of any flows at the treatment plant.
Okay, thank
All
you.
flows are always treated through every single process that we have under all
Okay.
conditions.
And there's been multiple questions about the exact coordinates of the outfall. Would it be possible for someone to put that in the chat from your team or the DOH? Would anybody?
Yeah, I mean, we could do that.
Okay.
Yeah, we could do that. It's kind of a lot of numbers. It is in the permit, and as Daryl showed, it's that permit is on the website, so you can get the permit, and those numbers are in the permit on that map that's shown. It has the exact coordinates.
Okay, thank you. So we understand now about the signage. This is for the Department of Health. It's pretty clear about the signage that you folks need to put out when there's an exceedance from the wastewater treatment plant. But what about other, the signage that associated with brown water runoff? Daryl, are there state signs, and what do they say?
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. So we do have permanent signs that we already ordered, and then we're working with the city's parks department to have them installed. So right now, there's just some legal paperwork that has to be resolved, I guess. I have pictures of the slides on the presentation. If you are okay, I can show it. I can share it with everyone.
Yep, go ahead.
Let's see if I can find it. So this is the image of what the permanent brown water signs would say. So if it's brown, turn around. It mentions after the, heavy storm events, you may have pollutant levels that are higher than normal. And then there's a QR code, and then there's the Department of Health's contact information.
Okay, another question says the boundary for Kailua Bay is random. How do we get the notices up in Lanikai as well when there's an exceedance, seeing as though this is a high tourist destination? Do we think that this water travels to Lanikai?
I don't think so. Oh, go ahead, Myron.
Oh, I can get that. Yeah, when we monitor Lanikai, it's it would have its own advisory. The signs will be posted at Lanikai. Generally, because a lot of times when we see these exceedances, they're generally localized to the area unless there's a known event. So we don't expect under normal circumstances, exceedances from Kailua Bay moving over to Lanikai and vice versa. They're generally kind of localized.
Okay. Is there a current drift study of which way the wastewater effluent goes that people could read? And do you think there is an issue of that study possibly being obsolete because of ocean level rise?
Yeah, there was a study done, but whenever we know that there's a confirmed event, a confirmed exceedance, we are required to notify the city, the public, regardless of whether some study thinks the flow is going to go other, in the other opposite direction, because it's basically a model where nobody's going out there every day to confirm the flows and things like that. So this is just a notification. So, we don't go by that. We just need to notify the public.
Okay, so there was multiple questions about the location of the outfall pipe. Asking, is it really where it's said to be? I guess there's rumors that it's not, that it's closer than shown on the maps. And what was the other question? And that it was originally designed to be way further offshore than it currently is. It was built closer than it was designed for. Is there any truth to those rumors?
I can say that we can confirm that the outfall pipe is where we say it is. Whether it could be further out or was designed to be somewhere else is a question that I don't think we know the answer to. It's been there for a very long time. The studies would have been done a long time ago.
Okay.
And the models that are used make a lot of assumptions, and those models are essentially established by EPA. So we don't get to just make up models. We have to use the EPA model.
Okay. What are the chemicals used in the disinfection at the plant?
Currently, there's no disinfection operation at the treatment plant. The city does, in the past, like many cities, the city used chlorine to do disinfection. And the city doesn't use chlorine anymore at any facilities. And there used to be some private facilities and military facilities that use chlorine, but everybody has converted to UV pretty much wherever there is disinfection, because chlorine is kind of a hazardous chemical for treatment plant personnel, and a lot of safety precautions are required. UV is much safer, I guess you'd say, for plant personnel, and doesn't have chemical residual, doesn't require you to bring in chemicals from out of state and things like that. It just uses electricity. So UV is the choice going forward. The interim, we're looking at a different chemical than chlorine. It's not coming to mind right now. Dan, you can jump in. Is it? It's an acid. It's called
Peracetic acid.
Peracetic acid. Thanks. Well, couldn't think of that. So that is a chemical that is, an alternative to chlorine. It's safer, and it is used some places. The challenge in other treatment plants, not in Hawaii. And the problem is that none exists in Hawaii, and we have to bring it in. So we're in the process of doing that. We have a little bit of it in the lab, but in order to use it at full scale, we need to bring in a lot more. We need to make sure that that's worth that expense before we actually engage or push the button on that interim solution. It would only be interim until the UV is online.
Okay, great. Another question is about the maintenance of the plant and any plans. So does the permit mandate maintenance, and is there a log of maintenance the public can observe? And are there plans to expand the plant if there's more, ADUs and residences being added?
Yeah, those are good questions. So plant maintenance is required. It's something that we do all the time. And maintenance is required in the permit to keep the plant operating at its efficiently. In terms of flow expansion or process expansion, the treatment plant generally by law, treatment plants need to go through the process of starting to expand when you reach 85% of the permitted design flow, which Daryl showed is 15 MGD. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong. Current flows are around 11 to 12 MGD. It is possible that flows could increase in the future. Generally, that's not what we see. Basically, at all our treatment plants, we see flows are essentially stable level or decreasing. And that really has to do with water conservation efforts in general. over the past 20 years, people are using less water in their homes, and that also means less sewage. So there's we continue, we do studies, we update our facility plans about every 5 years, and we project what future flows are going to be and whether we need to expand capacity or not. If we do need to, we will.
There is a question about knowing that the military base shares the same outfall. What are their requirements and, posting signs, et cetera, for them? Maybe that's Department of Health.
Yeah, so if it's for the Marine Corps base, they have the exact same requirements. And so there's notification to the news services, there's sampling that has to be done. So it's pretty much the same thing.
Okay, cool. Another question about expanding sewer lines. Somebody says there's currently about 32 cesspools on Kalaheo Avenue and 209 in the Kailua neighborhood. Are there also plans to include those on the sewer line?
I believe so. I don't have specific information about those two areas readily handy. We do have quite a few sewer improvement district projects where we're bringing sewers to different neighborhoods that are in the planning or design phase. But those projects take time. They're expensive, they're disruptive, and and they have to be approved and permitted and many other things. So I would say it is possible, but it's will not be happening in the next few years.
Okay. Another question: once the disinfection, I assume that's the UV disinfection, is brought online, will the permitted enterococci numbers in the permit be reduced, or is it going to stay the same?
For the NPDES permit, the limit is based on the water quality standard dilution and the water quality standard criteria and available dilution that's available within the mixing zone. There is also anti-degradation policy. So if a facility is capable of achieving a certain concentration or a certain limit, the permit could include lower limits to match what the facility can achieve. So that's something that I guess we would have to take a look at when the time comes.
Somebody's saying, presenters, please speak up. Oh, and that I'm especially hard to hear. Sorry about that. Okay, so I am going to open it up to people to ask questions. We have just another 10 minutes that they do not feel were answered. So please raise your hand if you have a question. And I see Gary does. And Gary, please make it quick so that others can also ask. There we go. I'm trying to unmute you. I don't know if you can unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, thank you very much for doing this. It's been very informative. Couple questions. One, when we toured the sewage treatment plant a year or so ago, that we were told that they were minus 30 employees. And I saw on your slide there that you have about 30 employees per shift, per 8-hour shift. Is that right? So is there 90 employees at the sewage treatment plant?
No, thanks for that question, Gary. No, that's the total number of employees at the treatment plant, and so they are split up among shifts. And so during the day, there's the most people there during the day shift. At night, there are only 2 people at the treatment plant, for example. On the weekends, there are fewer people than there is during the week. And so generally, a lot of the heavy lifting is done during the day when there are multiple people there, including operators and mechanics. And overnight, there's a lot less people. They're just sort of monitoring.
How many employees are you minus right now because of this city's ability not to get a lot more new people?
Yeah, so right now the city, there are unfilled positions citywide, close to 25%. And our department is similar. So at this treatment plant, there are several open positions. We are in the process of filling those. We recently hired 20 people out of 150. We have 150 operators altogether in the city. And we, before those 20 were hired, we were down by 60. So we're still down by 40 overall to operate all 9 of our treatment plants and the 71 pump stations.
Then a question we've been asked a lot is, when was the last time the diffuser was inspected? And when it does get inspected, which I thought was supposed to be annually, is there a video of that? Do the divers, can they take a camera down there with them and film that so the public can see that it's not deteriorating and it's all functioning properly? And then the last question I have is, it seems to me that you're allowed to do the testing 4 times a week, and then you're allowed 24 hours before you have to notify the state, and then the state has another 24 hours before they have to notice the public. And if you only if you only test 4 days a week, theoretically, you could have almost 4 days that the public doesn't know that something is going bad. Is that about right?
No, that's not quite the way to understand it. So we collect a sample. Samples are collected generally in the morning, sometime around 8 or 9 o'clock. The results are back from the lab 24 hours later, the following day in the morning. If it exceeds, we call the Department of Health immediately that morning. And then usually the Department of Health will tell us, okay, post signs, and then we'll have signs out by that afternoon. So it's done within hours of finding an exceedance. I think that's fair to say, right, Daryl? And
Yes,
All
that's
right. William Morris, would you like to ask your question?
Oh, yes, please. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone who is in the meeting. Yeah, I'd like to go back to Gary's question about the diffuser being inspected, because from the condition of most of the infrastructure underground that we see getting patched up and fixed under the roads, I would assume that the length of time that diffuser has been under the ocean, that there's quite a bit of wear and tear, and I would really be interested to see what that thing looks like. And that's why I asked for the latitude and longitude, so that I actually could drive a boat out there and go down and take a look at it with scuba gear on. And so that's the first thing. And the second thing is the 132 cesspools in the Kailua Ili of our Ahupua, that area is very, very depressed and very low, and it usually, I would think, drain into the Kailipu stream right by where the mouth of the stream is trying to get out to the ocean. And I believe there's some kind of a mandate that we're supposed to keep that stream open so that it doesn't collect in that area right by Buzz's Steakhouse. And I'd like your comments on that, please. Thank you for your time.
yeah, sure. Real quickly, so the I believe that the requirement for inspection of the outfall is once every permit cycle. So I can't remember if Daryl mentioned or not, but permits, MPDS permits are good for 5 years. They have to be renewed. They often change with additional requirements and stuff every 5 years. But during a permit cycle, before a permit expires, we need to inspect it at least one time. That does involve divers and or remotely operated submersible vehicles. It's quite an operation. It's expensive. We do monitor, so we do that, and the outfall is in good condition, and it remains as such and functioning as it was designed to. The can't remember what the other question was. Maybe that was I think that was both your questions.
All right, Bill, go ahead, please.
Mahalo. I thought that shoreline data sampling was really informative. And all those data points, there was only one single data point, and it was the top line early in 2021 that exceeded 130 if there was not a brown water advisory in effect. And yet, when a brown water advisory is in effect, it was 100 to 500. So if there's no outflow exceedance, if the wastewater treatment plant is running properly and there's no outfall exceedance, but there is a brown water advisory in effect, what does that data show? Is 100 to 500 typical during brown water advisory when the sewer plant's doing fine? And if so, it really points to brown water advisories being the major concern. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a stab at it, and maybe I don't know if Daryl or anybody else would want to add in. Maybe Myron. We haven't separated the data like that, Bill. We do our monitoring historically, just several times a month as required by the permit. We may or may not be sampling when it's a brown water advisory, but if we sample on the days that are prescribed, irrespective of whether there's brown water or not, right? So if there's brown water, we are collecting samples, and so it could look through the data and pretty sure that it would show exactly what you said, that the values are always high during brown water events, irrespective of what's going on at the treatment plant.
All right, I think we're gonna close it out and honor everybody's time, but I just really appreciate our speakers for coming and answering all these tough questions. And I'm gonna pass it over to Councilmember Kia Aina. She has some information to share that will also shed light on the questions.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Martin, and thank you for everyone for joining. I did see a question with regard to all of the questions that have been asked tonight, whether or not we could have follow-up with both Department of Health and Environmental Services. We will endeavor to do that. Just give us some time, because we're going to send it to each of the respective agencies to get written responses. And probably the best way to transmit it would be through the Kailua Neighborhood Board. There was a question relating to the opening of the berm by Kaelepulu by Buzzes. And the good news is that with the Enchanted Lake Residents Association and the Kailua Neighborhood Board, a couple of years ago, we were able to work with the U.S. Army Corps. And so the city does have the authority to be able to open that berm on a monthly basis. One of the challenges they're facing is, of course, their shortages. So I'm actually delighted to hear that at the Kailua Wastewater Treatment Plant, you don't have that problem. Another question was relating to the funds, whether or not there's enough funds to get the job done. And the answer is yes. Nearly 100 million has been allocated over the last 4 years for improvements there, including the 11 million for the UV light disinfection system. So I just wanted to say that, since I saw it in the chat room and people may not have heard. I look forward to working with my state colleagues as well as the agencies to trying to get as much information out on the websites to provide information to the public. Thank you so much.
Chris, do you want to say a hui ho before we sign off?
Oh yeah, no, thanks. Just thanks to the city and Rep. Martin, Councilmember Kia Aina, and also a lot of the folks who from the community have been working on this. I know Bob Bork. Bob, you had a hand up. Please do send that question in. You've been one of the champions looking at water quality along with many others. But it's thanks to everyone's vigilance that this stuff is moving along. So really appreciate everybody's time and look forward to seeing next steps.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Mahalo piha.
Thank you.
guys. And Bill will get you the PowerPoints so you can also send it out. Thank you.